How are you?
I'm good.
Excellent. Is it just the two of us again for today?
Actually, there should be at least one other. John Garrick, uh, our main guy for Eternal Impact, should be joining us,
Okay.
and possibly a couple others. So you can go ahead and get started.
That's all right. I had to restart my Zoom here because I was having some issues. So give me a second to get the
Yes.
screen share going. And we'll see if we can get there. We got a lot to talk about today that's sort of structural with regard to campaigns. It's going to be fun.
Yes.
Let's see here. Had to restart my browser, had to restart everything.
Well, sometimes that's the best way to fix technology problems. Just pull the plug and start over again.
I've taught my 7-year-old that already. When I'll say to her, hey, if something's not working, what's the first thing you do? She says, turn it off and on again. She's got it down. Okay. There we go. Now my browser's working again. Stellar. And you should be able to see it.
I can.
Hey, that's even better. All right. Well, like I said, we got a lot to talk about in terms of a lot of structure. And that's what a lot of this training really is focused on, is the campaign structure and how that works. And my primary focus is making sure that you're pretty comfortable with understanding that. And so we'll start, what I don't usually really like to do, but we'll start by just going through that structure top to bottom. And I've actually brought up our support article on campaigns, our campaigns article. I also blew it up really big so you can see it.
Yep.
But we use that just to talk about, hey, how do campaigns function in Virtuous and what do they do? And then we can talk a little bit more about how this kind of maps to what you're currently doing in terms of your fundraising. And then we'll look at, in the tool, some specific things in terms of creating and managing campaigns and segments and things like that. Okay, now before we jump into campaigns, we don't have a lot of time in our process. You'll have some in your migration process and everything else, but to talk about, in depth more about projects. And campaigns and projects really kind of, they go together in the sense that they're both part of that infrastructure for giving, as I call it. They're both elements to help you track your giving. And I didn't know if it was worth taking a second to review the relationship between those two, or if you feel pretty comfortable in terms of the
let me just tell you what
roles.
Let me just tell you what I think. What I think is the definitions there. So campaigns and segments are all at the front end. So things come in through campaigns, and then, but they're targeted at the back end at projects. And from our vernacular, campaigns is a familiar term that we use in Salesforce. Projects gets translated to funds, or what projects are what we call funds. And segments. Let's see. I'm not sure if we have an analogy of segments within what we currently do. We do have campaigns and sub-campaigns, but I might need a little bit of additional help understanding segments, which I'm sure you're going to cover.
Right. Well, I was going to say we've got today for that.
Yes. As far as the projects end of things, I think I understand that pretty clear. I think it's a one-to-one relationship between projects and funds.
Yes. Pretty much, and understanding that distinction is really good, and you described it correctly, right? Campaigns are basically how you raise the money, and projects are, I always think of it as where you spend the money.
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You can raise it through campaigns and it goes to projects. And that's good because, I've seen some instances where someone will say, oh, here's our spring gala. That's a project. Well, and that communicates to me that you're raising money to put on that gala, which means it's not a very effective fundraiser.
Right.
Okay, so everything we're talking about today is on that before side of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? The
Yes.
campaign structure. And it is a different structure than I've seen in most other CRM systems.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is whenever I talk to agencies and folks that do this all the time, they always say, oh yeah, that's how we think of managing campaigns. That's really where a lot of this comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a really good structure, even though it is different from what you'd see in a lot of the more common nonprofit CRMs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of elements to this. There's a lot of moving parts, but it really comes down to these three main structural building blocks that you see on the screen here. We've got campaigns, we've got communications, and then you've got segments. Okay, and within there you'll have channels and package codes and other things, but it's really these three main building blocks that's what defines this structure.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start, we talk about campaigns themselves, this first piece, and that's really easy, right? Campaign is a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It's really it's more of an umbrella. It's more of a collector that brings together a lot of different activities that you want to report on together because they share a theme. They all roll up to a particular goal, right? So like everybody just finished their year-end campaign that may have had a couple of different email drops and a direct mail piece and
Right.
social media component, but all of that is part of that year-end campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And so the campaign really is just that. It's the name, the theme, the dates, when did it happen, and how much are we looking to raise, and that's about it. There's not a lot of meat on the campaign, right, other than bringing all these things together. The real meat of all of this, the action items, right, all of that is at this campaign communication level.
Mm-hmm.
And the campaign communications are the things that you do to raise money. They're the letters or the mailers that you send out, the emails that you send out, events that you host, a splash page on your website, whatever it is. Those are all campaign communications.
Mm-hmm.
And the tendency is to think of campaign communication as being synonymous with what would be called appeal,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of times. And
Uh-huh.
while it's true that all appeals are campaign communications, not all campaign communications are appeals.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of communications that go out where the call to action isn't explicitly give us your money,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a newsletter update. It's a year in review. It's a, hey, here's what we did this month. But any of those communications should have somewhere in there that someone could click or respond and
Mm-hmm.
give you a gift. And so you
Mm-hmm.
still want to track how much came in from that, right? And there's other things that are a little bit more passive, for lack of a better term, things like having a donate button on your website. You don't ever really send out explicit communication that says, hey, go to Google, start looking around for nonprofits that, share a particular mission,
Mm-hmm.
stumble onto our website, click around a little bit, decide it looks worthwhile, and then find a button and give us some money. But it's going to happen, and I want to track how much has come in because of that.
Right.
Okay, so that donate button, that is a campaign communication.
Uh-huh.
I tend to think of it more in terms of the opportunities that you make available
Mm-hmm.
for people to be able to give you money, more so than asking for money,
Uh-huh.
if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. So each
You mentioned
campaign,
you mentioned you mentioned that events fall into the campaign communication.
correct.
And do you mean that literally the events that we manage through Virtuous are part of our campaign communication?
They would be, yes. Like if I have my gala dinner, the
Yes.
night of the gala, that is a campaign communication because that's a source of revenue.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to have a silent auction there,
Okay.
something like that. And so I want to measure that. And so that is a campaign communication.
Mm-hmm.
And that ties into one of the elements of a campaign communication, which is that every communication has a channel associated with it.
Right.
Okay. And that channel measures how that communication went out into the world. Event is one of the channels, as is direct mail and email. social media, web, right? And so that will cut across all of your campaigns, it cut across all of your communications, so that not only can you say, hey, how did our year-end campaign do? Or how did this particular email appeal do? But you can say, hey,
no, we're not going to sit there. Come on. I don't, no.
Oh, sorry.
Over with.
For a second, I thought that was a question for me.
You want to set this table. Okay.
No, sorry. Is that bleeding over into from my microphone? Sorry, this is John Garrick. Scott, we haven't met.
Hi, John.
Hi there. Hey, is that noise bleeding over from my?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Somebody's got a lot of background noise.
Yeah, that just started here. Let me see if I can mute.
No worries. Hey, I just heard it and I thought, wait a minute, is someone asking me a question? Let me make sure.
No, I'm at a coffee shop. So I have another meeting right after this one here at this coffee shop. So I will mute and until I have a question. I'm typing my questions out as we're chatting.
No worries. Yeah, if you have a question, just go ahead and stop me. That's, as
No
you can
problem.
tell, I will stop and answer. Totally fine.
Good stuff. No, I'm listening. So I'll have several. So no problem.
No worries.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. So as I was saying, you can measure how a particular campaign performs, how a particular communication performs. You can also measure how a particular channel is performing overall. So you could say, hey, for Q4 2018, how did direct mail perform as a channel, right? That's even one of the dashboard widgets that you could add to measure gifts by channel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing with the channel is it's sometimes thought of as being synonymous with a communication. I'll say to somebody, well, what does your year-end campaign look like? They'll say, well, we're doing some email, we're doing some direct mail, and I got like some web. Okay, well, that's great, but what are the actual communications?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because maybe you have a cycle of 5 emails that are going out towards the end of the year. Well, that's 5 separate communications, each of which happen to have the same channel, which is email.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So email in and of itself is not a communication. Email is simply a channel that gets assigned to one of these communications. And you notice that channel is not part of this little diagram here, because channel is not, all off on its own. A channel is just an element of your communication.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the communication is key. And the other thing that's a little bit different about this is the channel really measures how your communication went out to your donors, not necessarily how a gift comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, I'll look at someone's giving, they'll say, well, this is our web giving. We like to measure how much of our giving is web giving. But if you really dig into that web giving, what you realize is that some people gave online because they got an email and they clicked on a link. Some people gave online because they read a blog post that had a call to action at the bottom and they clicked on that. And some people gave online because you sent them a mailer and that had a URL in it. They went to that URL and they gave a gift. And those are all different, right?
Mm-hmm.
What moved the needle, what made that gift happen is not web. What made it happen is email. The blog post would be web and the direct mail piece, direct mail. And so I want to measure that part, right? I want to measure the part I can control, which is how did I ask for it, not how did they decide to give. Does that make sense?
Does make sense.
Okay.
And how then is that done? So how do you make those differentiations between those different channels in which the donation actually came?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, you just said we want to make sure that we don't lump a bunch of these things into the web channel because it actually came from a URL that was on a direct mail.
Right.
So how do we make those differentiations in the channels? So like if somebody clicked on a URL because they got a direct mail that had a URL in it, how would we know that that came from that direct mail?
Well, we're getting there.
Okay.
Because it was all be
good.
part of
Yeah,
it.
I had that question too, so no problem. I'll wait to hear the answer on that one.
No, sure, because it's all part of building this structure to be able to track that, right? So I've got my campaign, like we said, year end, whatever it is. That campaign has some different communications that I'm using to ask for gifts, each of those communications in turn will then have one or more segments associated with them, right? So this is where we get to that third piece. And segments, right? We looked at segments yesterday when we were doing gift entry, right? When I enter in a gift, I select a segment code. And the thing is that segment code at a very basic level is just that. It is a source code, right? That says, hey, this gift came in response to this particular communication, which was part of this particular campaign, right? At a very basic level, that's it. And the thing is, when you enter a gift in Virtuous, you don't have to specify, here's the campaign, here's the communication, here's the channel, here's the segment. It's just segment, because each segment code is unique. So I have one code that communicates all the rest of that information. And in addition to telling me all of that, the segment can also tell me what donor segment or group, that donor was in for that particular communication, because I can have multiple segments for any of my communications. Now, the heaviest segmentation typically we'll see on direct mail, more so than email. There's some things you can't really segment, like your donate now button. That's just out there to the world. Whoever sees it, right? But on direct mail and things like that, then you'll see a lot of heavy segmentation. And while there are people who spend their whole lives analyzing and coming up with great strategies for segmentation and all kinds of stuff, people with plenty of math degrees and everything else, at the end of the day, all segmentation really comes down to, I'm doing it for one of two reasons. Either A, I'm going to ask a lot of different types of people the same question, and I want to see how those different folks respond, right? I'm going to ask everybody in my database to give me $100. When I do that, how do lapsed donors respond? And how do major donors respond? And how do non-donors respond when I ask them that? Or I want to send everybody the same 2-page mailer, right? Same year in review mailer, but I want to ask them for something slightly different. I want to vary the ask string, because if you're a major donor, I'm going to ask you for a larger gift. If you're a recurring donor, I'm going to ask you for a one-time gift. And if you're just a one-time donor, I'm going to ask you to become a recurring donor, right? And it could be both of those, who knows? But that's it in terms of my segmentation. Okay, so I can create as many segments as I need to for any of my communications to be able to track that. And then the key is to make that segment code available on the reply device. If it's a hard mailer, I print that segment code on the tear-off or on the response envelope.
Mm-hmm.
For online giving, I'm going to build that segment code into the donation form, or maybe code it into the URL for the donation form, so that that comes back to me with that gift, so that I can measure where that gift came from.
So essentially, each communication, each campaign communication ought to be identified with a segment of that communication.
Has to be.
Yeah, got it. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. Keep going.
No, sure. At least at a very basic level, that concept makes sense.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Now I've got a few examples here of some, campaign structures. Okay, and this first one is for a small organization. We have some clients who are kind of at this level, right? They're just getting started. Sometimes I'll say to them, hey, what do you do to raise money? And they only have a couple of things. Mm-hmm. And I should say that there is no, when it comes to campaigns, there's a lot of variance across the board. Everybody's doing something a little bit different to raise money. And everybody wants to analyze what they're doing a little bit differently. Okay, so the nice thing about campaigns is they're really flexible. You can use these a lot of different ways, but the difficult thing about campaigns is they're really flexible. So you end up having to make a lot of decisions. There's not a lot of hard and fast right or wrong answers. There's some better or worse choices. People come to me a lot and say, hey, I have this thing. Should it be a campaign? Is it a communication? What is it? And my answer is always, well, it depends. How do you want to measure what you're doing? How do you want to report on it? How does your board expect to see it if you have to report up to the board? All of that's going to dictate this. Because I can report on any level of this. I can see how a particular segment did, how a particular communication did, how a particular campaign did. But I want to think about, well, what's going to be easier? Right? If I'm looking at my dashboard and I've got my top campaigns this year, not so much data for this year, let's do last year. And I've got my top campaigns up here, right? Do I want to know that winter sponsorship includes 3 or 4 other different initiatives, or do I want to see them all broken out on their own? right? How do I want to see those campaigns? When I go to pull my campaign reports from my dashboard, like my campaign giving and my campaign summary, do I want to have to pull a couple of different reports to see how different campaigns performed, or do I want to see them all rolled up to my back to school open house collection, for example, and have a lot of communications underneath of that? Okay, so there's a lot of different things that go into it, but it's mostly how do you want to see your data?
Okay.
And here we've got this small org, right? And so I'll say, hey, how you doing? They'll say, we only have a couple of things. So, okay, that means that you're just going to set up an annual campaign. And every organization is going to have an annual campaign or a general campaign, right? And that's where some of the things will live that I always call kind of evergreen, right? Having your donate now button on your website. That doesn't belong to any one particular campaign. That's just always there, right? Recurring giving. If you're going to have a program to measure recurring giving, because someone makes a new recurring gift, great, I have a campaign that I use to ask for that gift. But 5 years later, I don't want to continue to attribute, their payment, their monthly payment, to a campaign that I closed 4 years ago. So I might put that into a communication that I call recurring, right? Or whatever the name of my monthly donor program is, my membership program, etc. Grants. Grant money is going to go into Virtuous as a gift. And so I'd have a communication for grant funding, right? Major giving. I might have a campaign for my major giving program. I might roll major gifts into my annual campaign. It all depends.
So Scott, I have a question here, and you might touch on it
Sure.
later. Let me ask it now. So taking the example of online giving. So we have one online giving donate now button on our website, but within that we have multiple projects that people can select from.
Okay.
Okay, so how should I be thinking of those multiple projects as part of that one button online giving in relation to the campaign, the communication, and the segment?
As projects, right? Because again, the donate now button is, well, how did they give? They went onto the website, they found a button to donate, and they chose to donate. That was why and how they gave. Then if they gave to project A, B, or C, that's going to be in the project designation for their gift. And that's why it's important to have campaigns and projects as separate, because I can have, a gift come in through any source that goes toward any other source. So that's going to give me clear reporting. So that description of different projects, that's apt in that sense.
So let me ask you this, and sorry if these questions are maybe a little naive, but let's say we do a direct mailer, and in that mailer, we describe a particular project, and we say, hey, we'd love for you to donate. Go to our Donate Now button on our website to make a donation towards this project. So in my mind, I'm thinking that the communication and the segment is that direct mailer. But they're going to the online giving and giving through that. So
I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
That's why.
Well, what would you do?
What I would do for that direct mail piece is either, well, I want to have some kind of response device, right? Whether it's a tear off, whether it's a reply envelope, whatever it is. That reply device is where I'm going to print whatever the segment code is, right? ABC123. So when that comes back into me and I'm doing gift entry, hey, there's my segment, easy peasy. If I want to give them the option to give online, then what I want to do is create sort of a friendly URL in there. That's not, hey, just go to our main website and our main donate button. Because if you do that, I can't differentiate that traffic from just regular web traffic at that point. But if I gave you a friendly URL that said, hey, if this is for my new headquarters program, hey, go to www.eternalimpacthq.com. We set up a special website for it or whatever it is. Great. Make it an easy URL for them to put into their browser or anywhere else and click, and go to. And that URL could take someone to your same donation form if you guys are using Virtuous Giving, but I can code into the URL a particular segment code.
Yeah.
So that then when they land on that page, even though they don't see a difference, they just see your donation page and they give.
So
That is
if
going
I
to
understand,
pass over a segment code that says this came from someone who went to this, who got this mailer.
right, got it. Okay, so in that case, doing it correctly as you've described, then that would be a different segment and a different campaign communication button on your diagram here, and it would be that dedicated thing that would land it to a dedicated online giving spot, and that would be its own segment and channel into the overall campaign.
Right, and I don't have to have a different donation form. That's the nice thing
Right.
about
Yeah.
Virtuous Giving is I can have one form that has multiple URLs that drive to it,
Right.
and because I can code into that URL a segment and
Yes.
even a project, and so that can say, hey, if you click on this, even though again you land on what looks like the exact same form because it is, it's going to tell that form, hey, when this gift comes through, here's the segment, here's the project. Put this on that gift. But that's the idea. And the thing is, I have people ask me a lot too, what happens if I send someone a mailer and they say awesome and they turn around to their computer and they just go into the address bar and they search for us and they go to my main donation form? Well, nothing I can do about that. Right? That's going to happen. Some people will do that. But it doesn't mean that I don't want to build the structure to track as much as I can.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Got it.
Sure. So again, here's a little structure for a small org, right? Someone who says, and I've had this conversation with folks. They'll say like, yeah, we're doing a couple things. All right, so what do you know? So they got their annual campaign. What do you do? Well, we have a donate button on our website. People can give. Okay, great. That's your online giving, right? And that has its own segment. So I can track that giving, and that's just one-to-one. And then they have one big event in the spring. Great. And they just have a segment code created for that so they can track how much is coming from their spring event. And at the end of the year, they send out one big mailer to their whole database, and maybe they do two segments. They do donors and they do non-donors, and that's it. And for a really small org, that's totally fine, right? This is going to give them some visibility into their giving and where it's coming from. It's not like they're doing it, again, not they're doing it right or wrong or anything. I'm not a big fan of one-size-fits-all segmentation. That's something you only get from consultants. But you notice that here, and you had mentioned this earlier too about events. So there's this spring gala event that's in here. And while an event is a campaign communication, we said that earlier, a lot of times when I have an event, I have a lot of communication around that event. I've got to save the date, and I've got invitations, I've got all kinds of stuff. And so there's nothing wrong with building an entire campaign around a single event. And that's what this is. So it's a different model, obviously. This would be for a membership org, but the same ideas apply. So here for the event, we've got this save the date email, teaser email going out to two different segments. So this would be last year's attendees and then non-attendees maybe. There's a big splash page on the website. It says, hey, come to the event, and that has a segment. And for each of these first two things, right, the call to action here and here is not give us your money. It's come to the event. Come join us. But again, someone might see that and go, oh, I can't go to that, but I should renew my membership. So I want to track how much has come in because of that. And then there is a communication here for the actual day of the event itself. It's a membership sign-up event. Maybe I've got a couple of booths around where they can talk to people and renew their membership. I don't know. Again, if it's a traditional fundraiser, maybe I do have a live auction or something else going on. And that has a segment code to track what came in day of the event. And then afterwards, there's a follow-up mailer going out two different segments. So maybe this is, a thank you to some of the attendees, and this one's a reminder of the ones who didn't renew. Right? And again, this could have a lot more segments to it. We have some folks who do a monthly mailer with 40 segments per mailer. We have some folks who send out 2 mailers a year, and it goes to 2 or 3 segments. Totally fine. Okay, but a lot of different examples of how this can get deployed. Now, with this in mind, let's talk at least for a few minutes, because there's some other stuff I want to show you in the tool as well, but talk just a little bit about what you are doing in terms of your current fundraising. So we can talk a little bit about how this maps to this model, because even more so than projects, campaigns are really critical to understand because projects are pretty fixed. Your chart of accounts doesn't change a lot. But you're always going to be doing new stuff in terms of fundraising. You've always got
Right.
a new mailer. You've always got a new event going on. And so you'll be actively managing this more so than your projects.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
what does your, sort of communication calendar or marketing calendar look like, say, for the first half of this year?
Well, let me use a live example right now. So right now we are pursuing a new physical space. We call it the epicenter. So this would be our epicenter campaign. And
Okay.
there's multiple communication channels for that, including a direct mailer, including our website, including emails. I think as it moves forward, it will probably, and I'm not comfortable yet in my fluency of your vernacular, but it will include, um, sub campaigns, or maybe these are segments, which are related to aspects of, once we get the space, we'll want to have campaigns to remodel this office. We'll want to have a campaign to do such and such. We may want a campaign, or we may want a part of this to be fundraising for a specific piece of equipment, say. And all of those may go out in different channels with different segments. So that's an exercise I think that, John and I will have to work through to map correctly and appropriately into this structure.
Well, and talk to me just a little bit, because this is an interesting one. So talk to me a little bit about the sub campaigns, I think, right? Because having a capital campaign for a new space, great. But for the sub campaigns to remodel a particular office or to remodel this or that, is the intention to have folks give a gift that is specifically designated only to remodeling office A, B, or C, so that then you are limited to using the funds only for that space, or to have them give a gift designated to the overall capital project, meaning you can use it to remodel office A, and then if you need to use some of that money in some other part of the building or space, you could,
So
realistically.
a scenario could very well be that we have, let's say, 4 key spaces that need a variety of things. And what we want to seek out, say, um, might be we need a sponsor for this space, we need a sponsor for that space, and we need a sponsor for the other space. We want to get people to own the whatever is associated to making this space out of the entire space complete. So I think that would be the scenario that I'm envisioning. So,
Yeah, and just to speak into that, Ben, if I could just for a minute, Scott, if, for instance, in those spaces that he said, say there's those 4 or 5 of them, and a donor, doesn't, can't get their mind around 35,000 for a build out, okay, but they could say, you know what, I got a group, we can sponsor the room, the conference room, we're going to do that. It's $5,000. We can do that. We're going to take that on. Now, I don't know if that is necessarily a marketing, from a Virtuous standpoint, or if that is where the money's coming in, because it's all going to go to the epicenter. If it ends up costing us $4,600, we have 400 more. Well, we can put it anywhere in the epicenter that we need to. So I understand the question. I'm not sure what the answer is on that either.
So this is what I'll say, given what you described. Some of this is on the campaign side, some of it's on the project side. And this is where capital campaigns are where you always have some overlap, right? Because the capital project is new space, right? It's a project. It's going to cost X amount of dollars overall. Now, to raise money for that project, you have a capital campaign. It's for a new space, right? So they're very joined together, right? They're very connected on both sides. But again, on the campaign side, it's all about, well, how am I raising the money? And so you might have a small event for some larger potential donors that you're going to, or corporate donors that you're going to solicit for sponsorships. So, hey, sponsorship lunch. That's a communication that would be part of your Epicenter Capital campaign, right? And again, not hard and fast right or wrong answers, but if I'm building this out, so that might be my sponsorship lunch. It's part of the overall Epicenter Capital campaign. Then when those dollars come in, they get designated to the Epicenter project. Because like you said, hey, if we've already built out that space, we can use those dollars in some other part of the project. Great. So they should only be designated to that Epicenter space. Now, within each project in Virtuous, you can have some goals. Okay, and goals can be things that are descriptive. They can be things that are numeric. Okay, and when I set those goals, that's where I can do things like say, hey, as part of this particular project, as part of HQ renovation 2017, there we go, we're going to need $4,000 for our new conference room. Great. So one of the goals for this project, if I add this here, is going to be descriptive. It's going to be remodel conference room, and the cost for that remodel is going to be $5,000, right? And the description is going to be modernize, communications, or whatever it is, in conference space. Man, I can't type. There you go. Right, so that is part. It's one of the goals that I have as part of this overall HQ renovation project. I probably shouldn't have said 5,000 since I didn't realize the overall project goal is 1,500. That's a very small renovation. But that might be one of the goals that I'm trying to hit. And then when someone gives that $5,000 gift, I can say, great, that's going to the remodel conference room goal.
So Scott, going back then to the marketing side of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question, when you said give us some examples, my question would be, in terms of thinking about the overall campaign of the Epicenter, and I guess I'm kind of thinking of like a part of that is, part of the Epicenter is this project, we got to remodel the conference room. And now we've got, we want like a campaign to raise the funds for that particular need. And so how then would you, and that communication for that particular aspect of it is going to go out through multiple channels,
Okay.
maybe multiple segments. So how would that be reflected in this structure?
Well, again, this is all about the options, right?
Okay.
Because it could be like, hey, instead of having one Epicenter Capital campaign, I'm going to have 4 different campaigns, which are, the Epicenter Conference Center campaign, the Epicenter Meeting Room campaign, the Epicenter IT, campaign, whatever it is. Great. Then those are 4 separate campaigns. Each of those campaigns has a numeric goal of what I want to raise for that campaign. Each of them has a series of communications. Each of those communications can be broken down into multiple segments to track that. Now for me, and this is just my brain and the way that I think, if I'm going to have a capital campaign for a physical space, I want that all to be one campaign. And then underneath of that campaign, I can have a lot of different communications. I could have 4 communications that are all the Epicenter conference room, email appeal, Epicenter conference room direct mail, Epicenter conference room, web banner, and then Epicenter IT mailer, Epicenter IT email appeal, and so on. I can have all those communications in there because I can easily, again, go into a gift query or a gift filter and report on how did all the Epicenter IT mailers do. or Epicenter IT communications perform. But then for me, everything is part of that one overall campaign, right? So that tends to be the way that I think of it. But if I want to break it up into 4 smaller campaigns, totally fine. Again, that goes back to what I said earlier in terms of, do I want to be looking at my top campaigns and see that 4 of these here are different Epicenter campaigns, right? Conference room, and so do I want to see like this one's conference room, and this one here is the IT, and this one's the meeting space, and this
No,
one miscellaneous?
I'm much more with the way you're thinking.
Right.
So if I understand what you're saying, right, is that we would have one overall campaign, it'd be the epicenter, and then our different campaign communications would be the things that would distinguish between the various aspects of that overall campaign, like the conference room, like the IT. And then those communications then could be further segmented as to how do we actually make that appeal. And each one of those communications, like say for the conference room remodel, would have a variety of channels through which we would make that communication. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, each of the communications themselves, each communication has a channel associated with it, right? But those communications are how I can measure the different sort of sub-initiatives that I'm raising funds for.
Right. But like say, yeah, I think, so I think what I'm saying is that in the case of the, let's just say the conference room remodel, we could send out an email with that communication. We could send out a direct mail with that communication, and we could, do any number of things with that same communication, all targeted for the conference room, which is part of the overall epicenter campaign.
Right, and each of those is a separate communication.
Yes.
That's the key.
That's right.
Yep.
And can you set certain goals associated with those segments? Is there value in that? Like for instance, using tech, for instance, say you've got a segment of 40 people that are in the high tech industry, and you know that they would be interested in the 10,000 or whatever for sponsoring the tech. And so we did everything that Ben said. Is there a way to tie, or a need to tie a goal into those? So if the goal is 15,000, or does that goal just automatically get met when it comes back in regarding tech?
You can set goals, and we'll try to use some of the time we have left to quickly run through that. You can set goals at the communication level as well as at the campaign level. So I've got my campaign goal for what I want to raise, and then I've got my communication goal for what I want that particular communication to do as well.
Okay.
Yep. So I'll show you a couple.
I get that.
Yeah, I'll show you a couple quick things here, and I'll tell you too, one of the things that I always recommend to folks, because now we're talking about a major campaign, which is really, to be honest with you, a little bit easier, right? Because when you think about it, you think about it in these top-down terms, right? I've got a campaign, it's the epicenter, it's whatever it is, and then I got to support that campaign. What gets harder is when you say, okay, well, what do you do in an average year? Year in, year out, what does your fundraising look like? Most nonprofits that I've ever talked to have this sort of mix of being top down and then also a little bit shoot from the hip, right? It's like, oh, we've got these 4 or 5 big campaigns throughout the year. Here's how we support them every year. And then every so often we send out some other stuff. Okay, well, that's good. But in this virtuous structure, everything has to be part of a campaign. Even if it's just your annual campaign, everything belongs to a campaign. And so it forces you to think in a little bit more of a top-down kind of way. And one of the easiest ways to get there for some of those other things I'll say is to sit down and look at all the communications that you send out. So outside of your major campaign, look at all the other communications that go out. Sometimes you'd be surprised too at how much communication goes out to your donors, because you might not realize all the things you're sending if you haven't done this before. And then when you make that list of all those communications, you can start to then reverse engineer your campaigns. You can start to group those communications into campaigns. Some of them will be really easy. If you were to do that for this year, it'd be really easy because a lot of them would go to that epicenter campaign. But then you'll be left with a handful of things that don't belong to those campaigns, and that's when you can decide, does this become part of my annual campaign or my general campaign for this year? Or do I create a newsletter campaign for all the donor newsletters that go out, etc.? It's a good exercise to do to get you into thinking in this mode. Okay, so a couple things here. So we're here in your sandbox. Let's go to our campaigns page. That's our bullseye over here. We're going to create a new campaign. We'll go up to actions and create a campaign. And here I want to give the campaign a name. We'll call this one the 2019 training campaign. There we go. And every campaign has a start and an end date. There is no, here's just a general campaign that goes forever and ever, amen. It's always got a start and an end date. For my money, that makes it a lot easier to compare year-over-year numbers, right? Instead of having a general campaign, it's the 2019 general campaign, and then the 2020 general campaign. And each of those can have a goal. So how much do I want to raise? How many first-time donors do I want to acquire? What's the total number of gifts that I'm looking for? Okay, and for any of these goals you haven't set or you don't have, just leave the zeros. They just can't be blank, that's all. And you can plug in a description. That's internal, so you know what this is about. And you can set up an owner for this campaign. And that owner, A, it lets everybody know who's in charge of the campaign, and B, it has a functional component, because what we haven't even really talked about yet is that there is a project management aspect to campaigns. You can assign tasks, and you can manage content in here. And so as you assign tasks to people, the campaign owner will be copied on the task assignment emails. That way they can stay up to date on what's going on with their campaign. Okay, you've got space in here to store a Twitter hashtag, Google Analytics information. It doesn't tweet for you or connect to Twitter. It doesn't connect to Google. These are just spaces to store information. They're resource storage. And that is it in terms of setting up a campaign. Because like I said, the campaign itself doesn't have a lot of meat on it. The real meat is at the campaign communication level. And so down here at the bottom, I've got these checkboxes that list all the different channels that are available, and I can start to use those checkboxes to add communications to my campaign. And even though I only have,
quick question, yeah, on the Twitter hashtag, so and these other fields here. So you're saying that those don't really do anything. They're just a place where the owner could say, okay, for this campaign, we want to land on this is our Twitter hashtag for this campaign. If we would have some kind of channel out through Twitter, this is the hashtag we would use. Is that what that field is for?
So everybody on the team knows where it is. If you're going to have someone live tweet your event, they don't have to say, hey, what's the hashtag we're using? It's right there in Virtuous.
Got it.
Okay. Now at the bottom, I only have one checkbox for email, but you can still have 10 emails as part of this campaign. This is just to get you started. It's the only reason we give you one of each. I'm just going to do these two because I've only got a few minutes here. I'm going to hit next. And so that creates the campaign, and it starts to walk me through setting up each of these communications. Okay, and at the top it says, hey, would you like some best practice to-dos? And if you check that box, it'll say, great, who owns the tasks? And at that point you might say, wait a minute, what does that mean? So the best practice to-dos are these, they're pre-built task lists. Okay, some of them are 14 tasks or 9 tasks, and they all get assigned to a single user. Okay, but they're designed to help you understand what are the best practices for getting an email out the door, right? Or for having a radio spot or any of those things. It's really designed in some cases for smaller organizations, right? That's why they all go to a single user. And if you're curious what some of those best practice to-dos are, if you go to our campaign section here in support, you can actually see what are the best practice to-dos. This will show you the list. Here's what you have for email, for example, and for direct mail, right, and everything else. But that'll create that whole list of tasks just by checking one box. I've had people say, how did I end up with 14 tasks? I only clicked one thing. Well, that's why. Okay.
So when you click that, you won't see those you won't see those tasks show up on this window, right? It's
No.
just right. But they're
Yep.
all, once you click that, they'll get assigned per this campaign.
Yep, and you'll see them on the communication once it's created.
Yeah, okay. I got it. That's cool.
Now, if you'd rather create your own tasks, you can. You don't have to use ours. Okay, so you can create your own tasks as well. But you'll come in and give this one a name. So maybe this is my training email. Training email appeal. Sure, that's nice. And if I wanted to change my mind on the channel, I can. And I can set the start date. Right, so maybe this email is going to hit next Tuesday. I've got space here to put some notes on the description. Maybe I want to plug in what the giving URL is going to be for it. Great. What's the data segment description? Who am I writing for? Am I doing any testing? What do I want to ask them to do? What's my call to action? Right, all of this is information that I can put in here, so when it comes time to write the email, I've got my notes essentially all lined up for me. Everything has a step. This is the milestone. Where are you in the process? You'll manually advance these steps as you go through, but that way everybody knows where you are. You may have noticed some of the tasks are they're tied to these different steps. Here's where you can set the goal for this communication. And you can also track your costs. So internal staff time, right? External vendors, if you got a mail house or something like that. You can track costs here. You can track costs at the segment level. And we'll use those costs to calculate your ROI in some of the campaign reporting.
Hey, John, do you mind muting if you could?
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought it was muted. Sorry.
No worries. And then I can also set a default project. So this is something you would use for that Epicenter campaign, right? Hey, anything I'm sending out saying, hey, help us fund this project, any gift that comes in should be going to that project. I can set it as a default. And that way, in gift entry, when I set the segment code, the project gets assigned automatically. I can override it. It's just a default. But it means one less step when I do gift entry. It makes life a little easier. I can set an owner for this communication as well. I can even specify the type. And of these, receipt is the only one that's really has a function in Virtuous that creates what we would call a receipt segment. Okay, and that is a way for me to apply a segment code to the receipt itself, so that when someone replies to that receipt with their next gift, I have a segment code for it. Now I'll hit next here, and that will take me to the next one. So here's the direct mail piece. So we'll just say this is our training mailer. Maybe that's going to go out later on in the campaign. There we go. All the same fields. And it lands me on that last communication. I'm on my training mailer. I can click in the breadcrumbs here to go to the campaign. There's the two communications, and here I have a big blue button for me to add more. Okay, so I can keep on adding them however many I want to. For each of these communications, I can go right to the Tasks tab on the communication. That's where if I create those best practice to-dos, I'll see them built out. It's also where I can create my own, right, and assign them to any other user. There's also a Creatives tab. So if you gave me a task that said grab some images to use in our social media posts, great. Well, I can get those images and I would store them right here so that you know where to go find them when you want to pull them into your next post. Okay, so we want to create sort of a one-stop shop where you can find everything related to this communication. Now on the communication itself, as soon as you create a communication, the system creates a segment for you. You can't have a communication that doesn't have a segment. It won't let you. And it always creates it with a matching name and code. It uses the same pattern for both of these. It's always the first two letters of the campaign name, the month and year when the campaign started, right? And then the abbreviation for the channel. This one's direct mail. If you like that pattern, great. If you want to change it, also great. You can click on edit over here. Every segment needs to have a name and a code, okay? And the name does not have to be unique, right? Every mailer could have a segment called major donor, but each time that has to have a unique code, because like we said, that segment is the one unique value that ties a gift back to all of this other stuff. So even though the name might be the same, the code always has to be a unique code. Okay, and for this segment, maybe I want to call this one my major donor segment. then I can even associate this with a saved contact query. I could tie it to my major donor query, right? I can put in the cost per contact here. So if I'm using a mail house and it's 7 cents a name, I plug that in and I can save that.
What was the purpose of what you just did on the query?
So this says anybody that matches to this query, they belong to this segment.
Okay.
And then I can keep adding segments. And once I do, I can let's do what's called run segmentation. And I'll show you this real quickly here, and then I have to hop onto another call. Let me jump into my sandbox because I have this already done here in mine from an older one. But once you've assigned segments, or excuse me, assigned queries to all those different segments, you can also reorder them because someone might match to 3 or 4 queries, but they can't be in 3 or 4 segments. They can only be in 1, right? So when I order them, that says here's essentially the priority order. And then when I run segmentation, here's my fall training mailer. There we go. It locks those segments in order now because I can't change it. Okay, it'll assign contacts to each of those segments. And then I can come in here and I can view the segmentation, see it overall. If it doesn't look right, something is off, I can discard it, make changes, run it again. If it does look good, great. I can come in here and export a CSV, and that'll have all of the contact fields, the segment code, the package code, which is on a segment. It'll have the receipt segment, everything I need to do my mail merge and send out that mailer, or to send off to my mail house and have them send out the mailer. And the other thing that happens is it also logs the activity. So when I send an email to somebody through Virtuous, that's really easy. It can tell you, hey, Bob got sent this email today. Bob clicked on this email today, right? But direct mail, a little bit harder. So when you run segmentation, we use that as the signal that someone was sent a mailer. And so you can see that right in here in his communication history. I ran that segmentation back in May. So it says, hey, as part of this campaign, he got this mailer, and here's the segment that he was in.
Okay.
And so that's why I would do that query in here. Now, if I would rather import my own segmentation, I've got some external tool, or I've got an agency or someone who's doing it for me, you can import segmentation that's done in an external system. Okay, and that'll assign contacts to those segments, and it'll let me do some of the same things. Let me track that. It'll show that someone was sent that mailer, everything else. So I can use queries to segment within Virtuous, or I can segment externally and then import that. So I apologize. I know we got a little rush towards the end because we were having some good conversation back and forth about structure there. But hopefully all of this helps a little bit in terms of seeing how all this comes together. And again, you'll see some more information on some of this and on some of the segments and adding segments to donation forms and some of the documentation on Virtuous Giving, right? So as you start to create your donation forms, you'll be able to assign segment codes there. And don't forget, as we get towards the end of your training, we've also got an open hour of just Q&A. And so if it seems like we need a little bit more time spent on assigning segments to donation forms at that point, we can absolutely spend that time on that too.
Got it. Okay.
All right. And outside of that, I know we just hit you with a lot of info, so you can digest some of that. And then, Ben, I'll talk to you in a couple of hours. Go through admin training.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Scott. It's nice to
Sure
meet you via phone, and we'll get this figured out.
And
Sure
Scott,
thing.
you'll post this recording shortly.
I'll get that posted probably by the end of today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
We'll talk to
John,
you.
I hope you're having a good latte.
Yeah, well, just straight black coffee. But
Hey, there you go.
all right. Thanks so much, Scott.
Sure thing.
All right,
Bye, guys.
bye-bye.